Greetings, fellow moviegoers, and welcome to Movie Central, the place to talk about movies, TV shows based on movies, toys based on movies, games based on movies, and rides based on movies. I'm your host, Mr. CCS, and these are my pets, George the Gorilla, Call the Dolphin, and Frank the Sea Turtle. Guys, I'm sorry to say that this review may contain a few rants. I'm not wanting to do this because I want to stray away from the negative, but if a movie is disappointing enough to warrant a rant, then it must be done. So with that said, let's talk about what I consider one of the most wasted potential movies of all time, having watched it officially.
Okay, understand this. Universal really wants their monster franchise to be a success. After the failure of that abysmal movie Van Helsing, they gave rebooting a rest for a minute, though they did start production on The Wolfman around that time. In 2007, however, Universal decided that they wanted to make an origin story surrounding one of the more profitable monsters. I am, of course, talking about Count Dracula. Honestly, I don't hate this idea. It would be cool to see how the man that would eventually become an immortal vampire, renounce God, and claim the title of Prince of Darkness became the way he was, and a period piece set in different time periods as he slowly conquered would have made for an excellent movie. To write the script were writers Matt Sazama and Burke Sharpless, who eventually went on to write Morbius and Madam Web for Sony's god-awful Spider-Man villain universe, which probably explains why this movie wasn't exactly great, but I'll get there in a minute. Directing the movie would be Gary Shore, who has only directed a few other movies after this, so he isn't exactly well known. As far as casting goes, Sam Worthington was initially in talks to play the title character, which I don't think would have worked considering his heroic roles in the Avatar movies and Terminator Salvation. He left the project after the previous director left, so they cast Luke Evans, who was a growing star at the time, but more on him a little later. Further casting included names such as Dominic Cooper and Charles Dance, with the movie being shot in Ireland from August to November of 2013, before finally releasing in time for the Halloween season of 2014. Despite doing decent at the box office, the movie unfortunately didn't win over critics, with Rotten Tomatoes consensus reading as follows: neither awful enough to suck, nor sharp enough to bite, Dracula Untold misses the point of its iconic character's deathless appeal. However, it's been a full decade since the release of the movie, and I finally decided to sit down and watch it for this review, and boy, I have thoughts. What kind of thoughts exactly?
You're about to find out. This is Dracula Untold.
In 15th century Transylvania, Vlad III, played by Luke Evans, Prince of Wallachia, is known as just ruler. With his beloved wife Marina, played by Sarah Gadon, Vlad is brokered a prolonged period of peace and ensured that his people are protected, especially from the Ottoman Empire. However, when Sultan Mehmed II, played by Dominic Cooper, demands 1,000 of the country's boys, including Vlad's son, for his army, Vlad makes a deal with the monster, played by Charles Dance, that will enable him to help defeat the Turks, but cost him his humanity.
Folks, I gotta tell you, I went into this with super low expectations and I got about what I expected. Truth be told, I was mostly on board for decent portions of the movie, but it lost me several times and it was hard for me to get invested again. For an origin story of Dracula, the Prince of freaking Darkness, one of the scariest, menacing, and ruthless villains of all of fiction, what I took away from this is that Dracula is a misunderstood hero just trying to protect his people. Yep, it's one of those movies. A movie where they take a character that's well known for being evil and reframe the character as an anti-hero. This is just like the live-action Maleficent movies, or Cruella, or the Venom movies, or Morbius, or Birds of Prey, or the upcoming Craven movie. And I gotta tell you, I'm really getting tired of this type of movie, because it takes characters with depth and meaning, as well as recognizable personality, and completely turns them on their heads just so you can root for them. At least movies like Joker use this formula well, and there's enough ambiguity with his character and background that you can make a story like this surrounding him. But you can't do that with a character that you know is supposed to be ruthless and evil. I don't mind a little sympathy for the character, but to make them full on not evil just doesn't work. Add to that, the movie is really boring at many times, to the point where I kept on looking at my phone. The point I'm trying to make is that this movie is very bad, and was a terrible way to reintroduce Dracula. Like the Van Helsing review, I'm going to talk about what they should have done at the end before I give my final score, just because there are so many ways they could have taken this story. But before I do that, I need to expand my thoughts.
So, what did I think about Luke Evans as Dracula? Well, I think he certainly has the potential to be a great and brutal version of Dracula, but where he fails is the writing. There are a ton of scenes where we see a brutal fighter, one that is sadistic towards his enemies, and when he goes into full vampire mode, he looks great. But where I started to lose interest is whenever he was with his family. Dracula is a character that renounces God to live for eternity, and he didn't exactly need an heir or anyone to carry on his legacy, because he thought he would live forever. So, to see him actually have a loving wife and son was way too much Hollywood sympathy fishing, and that's what killed his character. Also, I genuinely think that if they cut the family plotline out altogether, Luke Evans would have been a convincing enough young Dracula. But with the family, I'm just thinking that he would have been a much better Jonathan Harker, who is caring for his friends and wife. And the funny thing about that is I think the movie is aware of that as well, because the end sees Dracula finding Mina flirting with her as well. Thanks, Universal, you've officially watered down Dracula, one of your most iconic characters. Congratulations, you deserve a prize, and that prize is my disapproval. Moving on to the family characters, Dracula's wife Marina was very obnoxious. I don't get Hollywood's obsession with making all of these love interest characters so pointless, and only there for an intimate scene, which definitely happens and very uncomfortably in this movie, which is only 90 minutes long, mind you. So, all of the time they could have used to expand on Dracula's character development was used for a scene like this, as well as a stupid franchise-teasing cliffhanger which has the reincarnation plotline. That's a knockoff of the concept from Coppola's movie, which worked for that film, but is detrimental to this one. As far as the son of Dracula goes, Ingress is supposed to be the young prince who cares for his father and grounds him, but ultimately comes off as a plot device more than a character. That said, the young actor, Art Parkinson, did a pretty good job with his performance. He would later go on to voice Kubo in Kubo and the Two Strings, which was a great film, and I have to admit, he has a lot of talent, easily one of the more tolerable parts of the movie. The people of Transylvania that are the subjects of Dracula, you know what? I'm not going to call him Dracula anymore, because this isn't Dracula. I'm just going to call him Vlad, because that's what most people call him throughout the course of this movie anyways. So, the subjects of Vlad are just forgettable, apart from the three you see on screen, Dimitru, Lucian, and that weird Renfield type of character that only shows up a few times in the movie. That's all I have to say about them. Finally, we have our villains. For the main villain, there's Sultan Mehmed II, and I'll be honest, Dominic Cooper actually works in this role. I mostly remember Dominic as the younger Howard Stark from the MCU, but here he plays a sadistic ruler hell-bent on domination, and that kind of works. No, he's not the greatest villain of all time, but at least he did something and was ruthless, like what Vlad should have been. Of course, the best part of the movie comes in the form of Charles Dance, who played the Master Vampire, who was absolutely fantastic. This is a threatening, genuinely scary monster that I fear. This is what Dracula should have been, and Charles Dance would have killed it if given the full opportunity to play the Prince of Darkness. Far better than that of Bela Lugosi, Christopher Lee, Gary Oldman, and others, I believe. Honestly, he has the sinister voice and would have looked really dashing yet unsettling at the same time in the black coat. But that's not what happened, unfortunately. The point I'm trying to make here is as follows. The best part of the movie reminds me of what Dracula should have been, and that just makes the movie worse in my eyes. That really sucks. I'd like to move on. As far as the effects go, they were actually pretty good. I think the vampire's echolocation effects look pretty incredible, as did the full vampiric face effect and the swarms of bats that attack the soldiers. I also really love the cinematography. It makes the movie look very dark and disturbing, which is what always comes to mind when I think of Transylvania. Some of the scenes I couldn't see, but the rest of the movie looks really great. Overall, for a horror fantasy, it works pretty well. As far as the music goes, the score was composed by Ramin Djawadi, who actually knocked it out of the park. The orchestral score with the tone of urgency, uncertainty, and dramatic weight is what we have here, and it's spectacular. Honestly, I don't know why so many of the bad movies I've seen recently have incredible scores. This is a keeper in my book in regards to bad movies with good scores. Finally, we have the tone and action. The movie tries hard to make it feel like Lord of the Rings. Too hard. I genuinely thought that all of the action sequences were all rip-offs of the Battle of Helm's Deep from the Two Towers, which, if you don't know, is my favorite scene in the trilogy. So needless to say, I was a little pissed off at that. Add to the fact that Vlad isn't frightening in the slightest. Neither are any of the scary parts, minus Charles Dance as the master vampire. The things that genuinely worked about the tone were the scenes of the dead bodies strung up, because at least that's true to the character. Whatever, I'm getting tired because I don't want to talk about this movie anymore. I want to make a quick comment on what they should have done before finally ending this nightmare of a review. If you wanted to give Dracula an origin story, then show him as the brutal conqueror, not explicitly Vlad the Impaler. Have him transform at the end of the first act, and the rest of the movie is his quest for conquest of the world, and would end with a promise of an adaptation of the original novel. You could have had a full-on Dracula trilogy if you wanted, if you just kept him evil. But nope, you turned him into a basic anti-heroic drab character, and that honestly feels like an insult. So overall, Dracula Untold was a huge letdown, despite my low expectations. The writing is awful, the story is mishandled, and despite some good music, cinematography, effects, and a great performance from Charles Dance, this is, by far, the worst adaptation of Dracula I have seen yet. I was originally going to give the movie a 2 out of 10, but upon reflection and realizing how much it pissed me off, that is enough to drag the score even further. So overall, Dracula Untold gets a 1 out of 10. I hope to never watch this again. I shouldn't have expected less from the writers of one of the worst movies I've ever seen, which was also a vampire movie. Now I can confidently say that these two writers wrote 2 vampire movies that are on my list of worst films of all time, and that's not a good thing whatsoever.
The worst part about this movie is that it is technically the start of the Dark Universe, and I am well aware that I have the 2017 Mummy movie on my list to review. And if it's anything like this, I know for a fact that we'll have another 1 out of 10 movie situation here. Possibly even lower, with a 0.5 or even a 0 out of 10, and that's something I don't want to do. However, if push comes to shove, I will. With that said, my name is Mr. CCS, this is Movie Central, and that, my friends, is a wrap. See you next week. Pray for me and the pets.